Hello. A little over a week ago, John Crowley, a man who I felt pretty comfortable in calling our greatest living fantasist, passed away at the age of 83. I have discussed and praised John Crowley somewhat often, especially his seminal 1981 masterpiece, Little Big, or The Fairies' Parliament. This tome, detailing the multi-generational history of the eccentric Drinkwater family of New England and their relationship to the world of fairy, which is hidden throughout their lives. It's everything. Intimate yet sprawling, complex and yet oh so simple. It is, dare I say, little but big. Its impact on the world of literary fantasy was nothing other than seismic. Ursula Kroeber Le Guin even went so far to say that this book called for a redefinition of the very word fantasy in everything that it entails. Thomas M. Dish, acclaimed author of challenging avant-garde science fiction, as well as The Brave Little Toaster, said that Little Big was the best fantasy novel ever, period. And he said period out loud in the quote. Harold Bloom, that wizened literarch, that controversial yet totemic literary critic, whose immense shadow hangs over the field of literary studies to this very day, frequently called John Crowley his favorite living author, often praising him in the same breath as late 20th century mainstays like Thomas Pynchon or Cormac McCarthy. Towards the end of the Western canon, Harold Bloom's landmark work about what he argues to be the greatest authors and titles in the entire history of Western literature, Bloom includes John Crowley's work not once, not twice, but 3 times, listing Little Big as well as the first 2 volumes of John Crowley's then unfinished magnum opus, Egypt, as exemplars of the best written works of Western literature of all time. I find this notable because Bloom wasn't a super fan of fantasy and science fiction. So in having 3 spots on Bloom's list, John Crowley is listed 3 more times than J.R.R. Tolkien, 2 more times than Ursula K. Le Guin, 1 more time than George MacDonald, the man who arguably invented modern fantasy literature. The only fantasist who John Crowley ties with is Italo Calvino, author of my personal favorite novel of all time, Invisible Cities. Little Big ended up sweeping the Mythopoeic Award and the World Fantasy Award, a feat only matched by the likes of Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, a work that just happens to have a lot of thematic parallels to Little Big. If you are a fan of the literary fantasy of Susanna Clarke, I think you would enjoy getting lost in the labyrinth of John Crowley's luscious prose. Little Big is one of the very few works throughout the entire history of fantasy literature that was immediately beloved by both the fantasy community as well as the literary establishment, and the love from both continues to this very day. Over the last week, I have read so many heartfelt eulogies from John Crowley's friends and contemporaries like Kelly Link or Samuel R. Delaney. But do you know how many booktube videos there have been eulogizing John Crowley or discussing his work in any capacity since he has passed away? The answer is 0. Not a single person. And that really bothers me. John Crowley was undeniably one of the best fantasy authors to ever live, and his work deserves to be celebrated and preserved. So I will take it upon myself to do so. I will admit, however, that in making this video, I feel like such a fake fan. Upon the date of his death, I had only read Little Big in its entirety. I have slowly been collecting Crowley's novels, savoring to read another when the time was right. But I thought that I had a lot more time, you know? So for this video, I wanted to read another work by John Crowley and discuss it with you. But he has so much interesting work that it was difficult to choose which one. Let me lead you through the periods of his career. When he first entered the scene in the late 1970s, he wrote a trio of distinct and subversive science fiction novels that didn't feel like anything else that was being put out at the time. The first was The Deep, which I am currently in the process of reading, although it is not the focus of this video. It's kind of about this android astronaut who lands on this very bizarre fantasy world. There is clearly a lot more going on here than I can currently perceive. I would really recommend this book to Gene Wolfe fans. Next up is Beasts, which is about, as you can guess, animal people coexisting with humans in apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic America. This is often considered to be Crowley's most conventional book, but still a really great read of its own right. The third is probably Crowley's most popular novel besides Little Big, Engine Summer. I read a good chunk of this at a university library a few years back, but I need to revisit and read the whole thing. This is about a commune of people living in the far distant post-apocalyptic future of the United States. It's a very chill and cozy read with a deep sadness underneath, and very ethnological in detailing this future society, how this culture works. It reminds me a lot of the work of Ursula K. Le Guin, especially Never Coming Home, and I am very excited to give this the full read. After these 3 books got published in the span of 4 years, John Crowley turned to the fantasy that he becomes known for throughout his career. He writes and publishes Little Big, as we previously discussed, but after that, he spends the next 2.5 decades working on his magnum opus, balancing the publication of these books with a new job teaching creative writing at Yale. This magnum opus is the Egypt Quartet, consisting of The Solitudes. This book was entitled Egypt in its original publication, so you might find it under that alternative title. Love and Sleep, Daemonomania, and Endless Things. I have long been excited to read this series, which Crowley fans say is even more ambitious and even more rewarding than Little Big. In fact, tracking down and purchasing these 4 novels was my Christmas present to myself last year. The series seems a little hard to describe, but I will try my very best. It is 1 story in 4 volumes in 12 parts, each corresponding to a sign of the zodiac, detailing a metafictional history of magic. I think it is about a man in the modern day who is tasked with writing a novelistic history of magic, which I think you pretty quickly come to understand is the very book that you are reading. Meanwhile, he discovers a set of manuscripts not written by him about the lives of various magicians and heretics and alchemists in the late Renaissance, especially John Dee and Giordano Bruno. And as you read further and further, these different interweaving plot threads intersect and correspond in novel and intriguing ways. The final book in the Egypt series came out in the mid-2000s. And throughout the 2000s, we see the 3rd period of John Crowley's career. A trio of historical realist novels with slight or overt magical realist elements. These would be The Translator, which is about the growing relationship between a Russian and an American during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have Lord Byron's novel, which is, would you believe it, a novel about Lord Byron. Finally, you have Four Freedoms, which is probably the most grounded novel he ever wrote, detailing the lives of different people in a sleepy American town who all come together to manufacture bombers during the Second World War. After the publication of Four Freedoms, we have a bit of a gap, not because John Crowley stopped being productive, but because he struggled to get published. Every volume of his magnum opus, The Egypt Cycle, was critically acclaimed, as were his historical novels, but none of them sold that well. Fantasy readers didn't want dense novels with elaborate prose. They wanted Wheel of Time, they wanted Sword of Truth, they wanted Brandon Sanderson. But nevertheless, John Crowley was able to publish another trinity of fantasy novels before he died. These novels were a synthesis of all of his earlier work, combining history and magic in various ways. In 2017, he published Dar Oakley in the Ruins of Ymir, a novel detailing the history of humankind and their interplay with magic through the eyes of a magic immortal crow. In the deluxe version of the 40th anniversary edition of Little Big, John Crowley reveals that we can think of Ka as a story within a story, a tale that exists inside the world of Little Big. This novel would go on to win John Crowley yet another World Fantasy Award. A few years later, John Crowley published his final novel, Flint and Mirror, appropriately subtitled A Novel of History and Magic. This novel concerns magicians in Ireland during the Elizabethan era. Flint and Mirror was originally a short story that got expanded to a full novel. In this short story iteration, we learn that Flint and Mirror is actually a story within a story, a tale existing within the world of Egypt. So, John Crowley's final two novels are commentaries and thematic epilogues to his masterpiece of Little Big in his magnum opus of the Egypt cycle. What's a more fitting way to end a career? Well, you might have noticed that there is one book that I skipped over, and that is the work that I will be talking about today. It's perhaps one of the weirdest things in John Crowley's entire bibliography, and that is saying a lot. That book is entitled The Chymical Wedding by Christian Rosenkreutz, a romance in 8 days, a rewrite of a 400-year-old alchemical pamphlet. The Chymical Wedding, often spelled the Chemical Wedding with a Y, was the third in a trio of pamphlets published circa 1615 that birthed the Hermetic movement known as Rosicrucianism. Rosicrucianism, a word derived from their holy emblem, the rose cross, was a spiritual movement that combined magic and alchemy with Christian mysticism. That might sound pretty unusual to you, especially if you were American. Over the last 50 years, there has been endless evangelical backlash against perceived occultism, the satanic panic, Harry Potter, and so forth. Evangelicals and other modern Christian sects argued that all magic was synonymous with devil worship. But surprisingly, in the Middle Ages, the distinctions weren't nearly so clear-cut. Amongst people concerned with the secretive arts, there were actually two kinds of magic. Demonic magic, the summoning of devils and other dark entities to help you do things, was seen as evil and generally bad news bears. On the other hand, you had natural magic. Let's put it this way. People in the Middle Ages believed that God created the stars, nature, and the earth. So, if you were to find magic within the natural world, then that must mean that God put it there to be discovered. That is how astrology, herbology, and alchemy flourished. From people exploring the natural world, using prototypical forms of the scientific method. As you probably know from popular culture, the ultimate aim of medieval alchemy was to create the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. These would allow you to transform lead into gold and extend your life eternally. Over the centuries, alchemists experimented with a wide variety of techniques to unlock the hidden recipe for the Philosopher's Stone. However, alchemists had a serious problem: the transmission of information to future generations. If you just had all of your notes from a lifetime of work written out in plain speech, then you could very easily be plagiarized by rival alchemists. But how are you going to clue future generations in on what you discovered? The process of creating the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life came to be known as the Great Work. Through a mix of legend and genuine science, medieval alchemists had gotten it down to a confirmed process. 12 steps in 4 stages. You would take the prima materia, the base material of the Philosopher's Stone, and treat it to various chemical processes to blacken it, whiten it, and yellow it, and then redden it. As the quest for the great work went on, alchemists realized that there must be some sort of spiritual process to it as well. Blindly recreating a series of steps wasn't good enough. The Philosopher's stone would only appear to someone who was worthy of achieving it. While you were performing these physical actions for the Philosopher's Stone, you also had to be achieving them internally, using magic and spirituality to purify your very soul. One would not work without the other. Your spirit must be blackened, whitened, and yellowed, and reddened. Only then could you unlock the Philosopher's Stone. One of my favorite memes of all time, a riff on the Seinfeld episode where Kramer has the bright red chicken shop light. Kramer, what's going on in there? We've achieved the final stage of the great work. The reddening of the prima materia. The combination of spirit and matter. The transmogrification of the soul. We've made the Philosopher's Stone, Jerry. To finish the point that I started earlier, how do you transmute information about the Philosopher's Stone to the next generation? Writing down a list of physical actions won't work. You also need to convey a set of spiritual truths that corresponded to those physical actions. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, we see a lot of alchemical texts that convey the process of creating the Philosopher's Stones in metaphorical terms. Works such as the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine or the Splendor Solis demonstrate the physical and spiritual process of achieving the great work through abstract, haunting imagery. What does this bi-gendered angel mean? What does this filthy naked man with a red cue ball for a head mean? I don't know. It's your job as an alchemist and would-be magician to figure it out. So with all of that context out of the way, let's catch up to the present of 1615 Germany, a land about to break out in conflict with the 30 Years' War. During this time, a set of pamphlets started circulating around, detailing the history of a man named Christian Rosenkreutz, German for Rosy Cross, would you believe it, who helps to found the Rosicrucian order, a secret society of magicians, scientists, and healers who use their mastery of the great work and other magic processes to do good around the world. They know how to create the Philosopher's Stone and other great works of magic, but they do not use it for immortality or financial gain. What's important to the Rosicrucians is helping out other human beings. And so these pamphlets encourage people around Europe to join the Rosicrucian order, to form an invisible college of magicians who secretly work together to save the world. If you are a fan of Discworld, this is what the Unseen University is riffing off of. Dozens of Rosicrucian societies popped up over the next couple hundred years, retaining widespread popularity amongst magicians and hermeticists until the late 19th century, where we start to see explicitly non-Christian forms of occultism, such as Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy or Aleister Crowley's Thelema, rapidly grow in popularity. Rosicrucian societies still exist, but nowadays they're more of a religious spin-off of the Freemasons. People in our modern secular age often like to argue that the medievals were dumb and superstitious, and then the Enlightenment happened, and now suddenly everyone is rational and no longer believed in foolish magic. But if you look at a lot of the major figures of the scientific revolution, you will see that they were actually quite taken with notions of alchemy and hermeticism. For example, we don't know if Isaac Newton would have considered himself a Rosicrucian or whatever, but he did write over 1 million words discussing magic and alchemy. After all, that's what the scientific method is all about. You're not going to dismiss the supernatural out of hand. You gotta test it first and see whether or not it works. So with all of this context, let me finally tell you about The Chemical Wedding by Christian Rosenkreutz. I mentioned a set of pamphlets that helped popularize the idea of Rosicrucianism. This is the third and final one. It is most usually called The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, but John Crowley decides to retitle it to The Chemical Wedding by Christian Rosenkreutz. It is being written as a first-person account by Christian Rosenkreutz himself. It is about him as an old man being summoned to attend a wedding. What he soon discovers, the wedding is actually the great work. It is an elaborate ceremony involving the death, rebirth, and marriage of a king and queen in order to craft the Philosopher's Stone, and to bring spiritual fulfillment to everyone who is attending. When Christian Rosenkreutz opens up his invitation, sent in an envelope of gold, sealed with the hieroglyphic monad invented by John Dee, he reads this poem. On this day, the royal wedding is. If you are one who's born to see it, and if God himself decree it, then you must to the mountain wend where 3 stately temples stand. From there you'll know which way to go. Be wise, take care, wash well, look fair, or else the wedding cannot save you. Leave right away, watch what you weigh. Too little and they will not have you. In this book, we follow this strangely relatable and imperfect man as he undergoes the steps to attend this wedding. He and many other initiates have to undergo a wide array of trials, mental, physical, spiritual, to see if they are worthy to attend the wedding. John Crowley makes it very clear that this is not a fresh retranslation, but a rework of the 2 prior English translations, one from 325 years ago and one from 125 years ago. All he is doing is tightening up the language, rephrasing certain concepts, and including extensive notes lovingly provided in red text, his various annotations and observations about the original text, the religious and alchemical symbolism of the different things that Christian Rosenkreutz encounters. In the second half, Christian Rosenkreutz actually gets to attend the ceremony, and he undergoes a very bizarre series of ceremonial steps to help complete the magic. Are the different actions in this book meant to demonstrate the physical steps for achieving the great work, or are they meant to demonstrate the spiritual processes? The events of this book are dripping with symbolism. So over hundreds of years, people have done Christian reads, alchemical reads, pagan reads. You can interpret it in just about any way imaginable. Indeed, because of its engaging prose and symbolic depth, the Chymical Wedding has become one of the most widely read texts of magic and alchemy throughout modern history. Do you know the best thing about this story? It is entirely fake. A year after the publication of the Chymical Wedding, a Lutheran theologian named Johann Valentin Andreae offhandedly mentioned in a satire he wrote that he was the creator of the Chymical Wedding. Decades later, Andreae wrote his autobiography where he doubled down on the claim. Yes, he said, the Chymical Wedding isn't a first-person account by some legendary alchemist. As a young man in my early 20s, I wrote the work that would go on to be known as the Chymical Wedding as a ludibrium, a word that means a satire, a jest, a fantasy. He decided to write a work in the style of these alchemical, metaphorical, great work textbooks for fun, just to entertain himself while he was going to college. He didn't realize how popular and influential his pamphlet would end up being, especially as a guy who didn't really believe in magic in the first place. So here's the interesting thing. Andreae only ever claimed to have written the Chymical Wedding. He made no claims to have written the other 2 Rosicrucian pamphlets that were distributed the year before. But a lot of sources will claim that it's possible, not probable mind you, but it's possible that he wrote all 3. After all, he says he first started writing the Chymical Wedding back in 1605, a decade before the Rosicrucian pamphlets were all distributed. So either he invented the mythology of the Rosicrucian order out of whole cloth, or after he saw the popularity of the first 2 Rosicrucian pamphlets, he decided to retool this old draft he had to be about Rosicrucianism, to satirize the notion of these secret societies. But regardless of whether he wrote the other 2 pamphlets, Andreae writing and publishing the Chymical Wedding helped cement the legend of the Rosicrucians. In doing so, he inadvertently memed them into existence, not unlike the fiction of Jorge Luis Borges and Umberto Eco. The fact that all of this is fake is exactly why John Crowley is obsessed with it, why he wanted to make a new version of it for the 400th anniversary. John Crowley says that the reason why he loves this novel, even if you ignore the symbolism and you ignore the great work and you ignore the hermeticism and the alchemy, it is just a really dang entertaining fantasy novel. It's mysterious and complex and keeps you engaged the entire time. In fact, John Crowley even makes the claim that you can consider this the very first novel of science fiction. These days, a lot of people point at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And yes, you can easily point to that as the first great work after the scientific revolution, exploring the implications in the follies of modern science. What John Crowley argues is that this book, with its bizarre mix of Christian and occult symbolism, alchemy, and its blood magic, represents exactly what science was understood to be in the year 1615. So what if Andrea made it all up? Even if Johann Valentin Andreae didn't intend for anyone to find spiritual or magical truth in his work, the very fact that tens of thousands of people over the last 400 years did so makes the Chymical Wedding a work of magic. The meaning in the beauty that people have derived from his work retroactively made it a work of great magical import. Magic in abstract is about self-improvement. It's about learning your own heart and your own soul, making steps to improve yourself, mastering your external reality by mastering your internal reality. And the beautiful thing about this realization is that it means any book of fantasy, even any work of literature, can be imbued with this very same magic. What does it matter if somebody, a man or a woman, an adult or a teenager, made it all up? It might not be real, but if it helps you become a wiser, kinder, more fulfilled person, then it's true. And that is what magic is. That is what John Crowley understood. By infusing his stories with kindness and beauty, the literature of John Crowley doesn't just concern magic, it is magic. And that is why we must keep reading him for the decades and centuries to come. As I have been telling you all video, the notion of the great work infuses every aspect of alchemy, both physical and spiritual. But I think you can guess that the alchemists weren't just saying great work, great work, great work in English. No, they would have used the shared language of learning and mysticism. So when they were talking about the 4 stages and the 12 steps of the great work, they would refer to it by its Latin title, the Magnum Opus. So in 2027, I am going to read through the Magnum Opus of John Crowley, the Egypt Cycle, a work of, what's this, 4 volumes, organized in 12 parts? Very curious. And I sincerely hope some of you in the audience will read along with me as we work through not just one of the greatest works of fantasy ever produced, but literally one of the greatest works ever written in the English language. To sum it all up, Michael Chabon, beloved author of The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, The Yiddish Policeman's Union, and countless other excellent works, once said, "There are some people, and I am one of them, for whom life only consists of passing time between novels by John Crowley. So let's live life together. Thank you, and I love you."